Not to completely ruin the storyline, but can you walk us through this citizen journalist movement that you empowered? Were there real world repercussions, and why did it work?
In terms of the storyline that you see in the film, we pieced out probably 3 or 4 different narratives from hundreds that they were collecting during that time, because at least in terms of a storyline, it makes more sense to see a beginning, middle, and end of something. So we chose the ones that worked. But we flagged over 60 illegal forestry concessions, which launched a presidential investigation, legal cases against high-ranking officials, exposed the president and her family's participation in it, exposed tens of millions of corrupt CSR funds from big oil companies that were participating in this, that were paying off government and paying off systems and not leading to change and development in the ways that were promised to people on the ground. That is 1% of what we uncovered. And what we could say in the film was based on legalities, triangulating evidence, and a whole bunch of other factors. Whereas we've seen almost everything that we uncovered play out in the years to come about corruption, accountability, and the role of the first family. We were able to only put a tiny fraction of it into a pretty big film, but it's just to prove that the importance of empowering people with their own data and enabling them to control, own, host, and manage data was so much more influential than what I, as a journalist, could do in terms of the storytelling. So massive changes from the film itself and the participation, but continual changes from these communities, from these NGOs, and their continued work to this day, almost 10 years later, pushing and collecting and building cases for impact.
I think that's so phenomenal, because what you accomplished here, the impact that you accomplished from accelerating the information flow between parties by trying to make your film, in and of itself created, I think, far more impact than a film alone if it had just been extractive in its nature, where you're like, oh, I just want to tell this person's story because they got a cool story. Why do you think your background and experience led to this approach?
Okay, so if we kind of circle back to the beginning and like, how can you create change? And this is, I know, something that's very important to you. But I went from science to journalism to film with the intention of like, how can I change people's connection to the globe and their feeling of empowerment and change the course of how we interact with our world and what we want from the future of our climate? That was the intention that informed all of these changes in my career. So I'm always game for what I think could create more impact. So I think that's one level of just being like open, because of how many left turns I've taken in my own career, of what is the hard work that needs to be done to change the system, and not being afraid of trying that. I think on the other side of that, just being a good filmmaker and a good storyteller is the same thing as being a good listener. If I came into this film with ideas of what I think should be, I would be a bad filmmaker. Because I listen to what people need, want, how they think they can change their world, it makes me be a better innovator as well. And so when I came with this idea of, hey, let's create the system so I can make this film, Silas, who was my collaborator, beginning, middle, and end on this project, said to me, no, that's the same paradigm. You're coming in, you're telling a story, and you're leaving. That is extractive in its nature. That is the same thing as taking our ore and our palm oil and our trees. You must create something that empowers us and takes us forward to solving our own problems. Aid doesn't help. Storytelling from outside only helps as much as it can build a local system for people to solve their own problems. And you can be an assistant, and you can be a coach, and you can be a customer kind of support person. You could be all of those things, helping people understand the big picture and how to connect to it. But you're never going to be impactful on a large scale unless you acknowledge and accept people and the power that they have within them to change their own world. I think that's really what forged the course for Timby, is that we couldn't have made this film in any other way. We had to be successful. We had to listen. And we had to also, just as filmmakers, even in the smallest part of this, being a good innovator, again, is like listening and watching. But if you're doing user experience and user design, seeing how your users use a product is so much part of the process. And what you normally do is ask people questions and watch them using it. Now, filming people using your product and standing there while they are like, I can't fucking figure out how to use this is like mind blowing, because you're like, no. And you're like there behind the camera and be like, no, don't press this button. And then you're like, oh, wait. So you're watching them struggle all the time with what you've created and realize that you need to change yourself so that it works for them. So it's not for me to train them to use this better. It's just for me to change the system so that it works intuitively for people. And another aspect of that is what is intuitive for me as a tech savvy, digitally literate person is going to be very different than what is usable for a semi-literate or non-literate farmer. So those are all like the aspects of like, how did we come up with Timby? Why did it become as useful as it did? And how did it create impact? Is that it was a little bit of me trying to figure out what would work for the film and for them, and me being a good listener and watcher because I was actually filming them while they were using the first iterations of this thing. So in turn, I think Timby became a good product because we focused on just that. We focused on one tiny group of communities that were trying to achieve one thing and were with it for 5 years while we were making this film. And so if it worked for them and they could share the story of how it worked for them, then that became a powerful tool for it to grow. And it didn't grow with us. It grew with them presenting and being in the press and having a lot of impact in the work that they did. So that it was the knock-on effect of that, where we realized that actually Timby probably needed to grow bigger than Liberia because we were simply being asked for it by so many people around the world,
Alrighty, friends, if you liked what you heard in that little snippet and you feel inspired, make sure to subscribe right here on YouTube and head over onto your favorite podcast player to look for the Impact Everywhere podcast to find more inspirational guests just like this every single week. My name is Benjamin Von Wong, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Stay positive because impact is everywhere.